The old style of mental health treatment was mainly to give medications and to go to therapy. There was not a good understanding of why people had mental illness, and what we heard was mostly that it was just a chemical imbalance. So we took medications to change those chemicals, and we hoped for the best. And for most of us, the best really was maybe lessening of acute symptoms, and we couldn't really hope for much more. And so today we're going to talk about what will make the future of mental health brighter. Now, medication and therapy will always have a place in mental health treatment to help people live well with mental illness. It definitely saves lives, but now we know more about the brain, and we know the future can be even better. The future of improving mental health includes all of the research about how brain inflammation leads to emotional dysregulation, the brain-gut connection and the microbiome, how sleep affects our brain function, and how we can harness the power of neuroplasticity to rewire the brain for better beliefs and better behaviors, and how to set up a physical environment so that it works with our brain instead of against our brain. Let's just talk about the area of neuroinflammation and the gut-brain connection. Now, when my therapist 8 years ago told me about how food can affect mood and change our mental health, that was not so much of a common idea back then. But now we have doctors like Dr. Chris Palmer, who is a Harvard Medical School physician, and he is using the ketogenic diet to help treat bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. And these are two disorders, I have bipolar disorder, that most people think are on the upper end of severity for mental illness, and there's not a lot that you can do for us except very specific medications. But what he's doing totally makes sense. So for quite a few years, one of the medications that I was on for bipolar disorder was an anti-seizure medication. And so what they found, that was an off-label use of a medication that was used for epilepsy. They found that it helped some people with bipolar disorder. And so now that makes sense, because if you look at the ketogenic diet and why that might work, the ketogenic diet is used in epilepsy. And so it would make sense to then try and see if a ketogenic diet could help people with bipolar disorder as well, since medications that work for epilepsy often helped people with bipolar disorder. I feel it's essential that those of us living with mental illness, especially those of us where traditional treatments haven't worked very well, really be given all of our options and all of the tools to help ourselves live better with mental illness. If you're anything like me and decades of therapy and dozens of medications didn't really work well for you, then we are left to suffer for the rest of our lives if we're not given any other options and we're not given any other kinds of things that can support our mental health. And then also our families suffer, and no one should have to live like that. And we now know that it can be better. I was reminded of this just the other day when we ordered out for dinner and we ordered barbecue. Now, barbecue is something that we order frequently because I tend to know how to order off the menu to make sure that it is a low inflammatory, what I'm ordering is low inflammatory and works really well for me. So I ordered the same thing that I usually order, although it was at a barbecue place that isn't where we have gone before. So I started to notice that something was wrong about probably 2 hours later. I was walking out of a room and kind of lightly bumped my elbow on the door. And then all of a sudden I was extremely angry and I yelled at my son to go downstairs and get ready for bed. Now, all of that happened literally within the span of about 30 seconds. It was like my brain just took over. That voice didn't even sound like me anymore, but it did sound like the me who I was when I was in a bout of mania. And for mania, some people it's really happy. For other people, it shows up as extreme rage. For a few moments, I was terrified that I was going back into a bipolar episode, an episode of mania, because that is what this would have been a few years ago. I could not imagine going through another severe episode of bipolar mania, and I especially couldn't imagine having to have my husband and my son go through that again as well. I mean, technically in the moment I was manic. Had I gone to see my psychiatrist or psychologist or therapist, they would have said this was a manic episode. And So I was full of rage. I couldn't hear my husband or son's voice without just wanting to yell at them. It was so, I don't know, grating, annoying. Everything just made me mad. I wanted to stay up really late and then compulsively like clean things, or started to have the thoughts of I'm going to go get in my car and drive around the city all night. And these are all things that I would do when I was manic. So fortunately, this time I knew it was neuroinflammation from the food that I had eaten. And so I was able to start to put into place all of the protocols that I have for helping my brain have a better emotional regulation. If we don't raise awareness about brain health and all of the different things that we can do every day to improve our mental health, then people with mental illness and their families will continue to suffer. By living by example, by educating ourselves about brain health, and by changing how we live and showing how we thrive and we can become resilient heroes in our own lives, we can help end this constant cycle of mental health suffering. And when I think of this, I think about my son, I think about other people's kids, and my son doesn't have the best genetics to end up having good mental health. There's a lot of stuff in both sides of our family. And so what I think about is how he is learning through us about diet and sleep, and how that can change your mental functioning, how changes in his living environment can either cause a lot of stress on his brain so that it doesn't work well, or that he can change his living environment to help support his brain. I also think about how he's learning to rewire destructive thought patterns and behaviors, and I am hopeful that while mental health may never be perfect for some of us, thanks genetics for that, that our children have more options now to not just survive, but thrive should they ever have issues with mental health as well. And that goes the same for all of us now living with mental illness. We don't have to, just survive. We can actually thrive and be resilient. If you like this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And you can also follow me on Instagram at RevKatie, and I update that more frequently and give you lots of great information about brain health and living well with mental and physical chronic illness.